The card was declined. That's what she told me when she called, screaming, from the parking lot of Kroger. And honestly, I wasn't surprised at all. Let me take you back to where this really started. I turned 63 last March. I'd been married once before. A long marriage, a quiet ending. No real villain in that story. Just two people who grew into different shapes over 20 years. After my divorce, I spent about 4 years on my own. I wasn't looking for anything. I had my routine, my house in Raleigh, my work as a retired civil engineer doing part-time consulting. My life was settled. Small, maybe, but mine. I met my wife at a neighborhood cookout hosted by my next-door neighbor. She was visiting her friend who lived 2 houses down. She laughed easily, asked good questions, and when I mentioned I used to design water treatment infrastructure, she actually seemed interested instead of glazing over the way most people do. We talked for 3 hours that evening. I drove home thinking about her. We dated for about 14 months before I proposed. She was 58, recently widowed, a retired school administrator. She had one brother, Derek, who was 29 at the time we got married. She mentioned him often, always with a kind of protective tenderness that I found endearing at first. Derek's been through a lot, she would say, and I never pushed for details because it didn't seem relevant to us. We got married quietly. A small ceremony. Some friends, her cousin from Georgia, my 2 adult daughters who flew in from Portland and Austin. It was a good day. A genuinely good day. We moved into my house because it was paid off and larger than her apartment. She brought her furniture, her cookware, her photo albums. She brought her cat. Everything felt right. Derek came up in conversation about 3 weeks after the wedding. She brought it up at dinner. Derek was between apartments, she explained. His lease had ended and the new place wasn't ready yet. Could he stay with us for a few weeks, just until things sorted themselves out? She said it so gently, framing it as a minor inconvenience, a small favor for someone she loved. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was still in that early marriage warmth where you want to be generous, where you want your spouse to see you as someone who shows up. Derek arrived on a Saturday with a pickup truck full of boxes, 2 large duffel bags, a gaming chair, and 3 monitors. I remember standing in the driveway watching him carry things in and thinking, that's a lot of equipment for someone who's just passing through. He was polite enough at first, quiet even. He took the guest room, kept his door mostly closed, came out for meals. He didn't offer to help with groceries. He didn't offer to help with anything, but I told myself it was an adjustment period. He was young. He was between places. A few weeks, she had said. 6 weeks passed. I asked her gently how things were going with Derek's new apartment. She got a slightly pained expression and told me there had been a delay with the lease paperwork. Something about the landlord requiring additional documentation. Another few weeks, she thought. I nodded. I let it go. 8 weeks after he moved in, I noticed something at the grocery store. I was picking up a few things on a Thursday afternoon, and I ran into Derek in the chip aisle. He was loading a basket with things, name-brand snacks, an energy drink 12-pack, some kind of imported salsa I'd never seen before. I said hello. He nodded. We drove home separately. That evening, I checked our joint account online out of habit. I've always checked it weekly, something my father taught me. He was an accountant and believed that a man who doesn't watch his money doesn't deserve to keep it. And I saw a grocery charge for $61 from earlier that afternoon. I checked the timestamp. It was 20 minutes after I'd left the store myself. I looked at the charge again. $61. I had spent $38. That meant someone else had used the joint account card at that store that afternoon, 20 minutes after I left. I sat with that for a long moment. I went to my wife and asked, very calmly, whether she had gone to the store that afternoon. She said no, she'd been home all day. I described the charge. There was a pause. Brief, but I caught it. She said Derek had needed a few things, and she'd lent him her card. The card connected to our joint account. I said, okay. I didn't say anything else that night, but I started paying closer attention. I have a system for our accounts. I set up alerts on every transaction over $25. I don't do it out of suspicion. I've always done it since online banking became a thing. It's just maintenance, like checking the oil in your car. My daughters tease me about it. They say I'm the only person they know who still reads every bank statement line by line. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched. There was a charge at a sporting goods store for $114. My wife doesn't play any sports. When I asked, she said Derek had needed new running shoes. He was trying to get healthier, she said. I said, I see. There was a charge at a restaurant downtown, a place I'd never been to, for $88 on a Friday night. My wife and I had eaten at home that night. I had made pasta. When I asked about the charge, she said Derek had taken a friend to dinner. She looked slightly uncomfortable when she said it. I said, okay. There was a charge at a gas station for $50. Derek drives a truck. I don't own a truck. There was a charge at a pharmacy for $37. I asked what it was for. She said Derek had needed some things. She didn't specify. I didn't press. I added it up over those 3 weeks. $412, all run through our joint account. None of it discussed with me in advance. All of it quietly authorized by my wife using her debit card, which was linked to our shared money. I want to be clear about something. I'm not a man who yells. I never have been. My father was a quiet man who handled things deliberately, and I learned from watching him that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most effective one. So when I sat down with my wife that Sunday morning, I wasn't angry in the way you might imagine. I was careful. I told her what I had found. I laid it out. The dates, the amounts, the places. I told her I wasn't comfortable with Derek using our joint account as a personal expense card without any prior conversation. I told her that I liked Derek fine, but that what was happening wasn't fair and it wasn't sustainable. She listened. Then she said Derek was going through a difficult time, that he didn't have much money right now, that he was her only sibling, and she couldn't just turn her back on him. I said I wasn't asking her to turn her back on him. I was asking for us to make decisions about our shared money together. She said I was being rigid. I said I was being reasonable. She said maybe I didn't understand what family meant. That one landed. I didn't respond to it right away. I just sat with it. I'm 63 years old. I raised 2 daughters. I helped put them through college. I took care of my mother for the last 2 years of her life when she had dementia, driving 4 hours each way every other weekend. I know what family means. But I also know that the word family gets used sometimes as a way to shut down conversations that are actually about fairness. I said we would revisit it, and I left the room. Derek was still in the house. The new apartment, as far as I could tell, still wasn't ready. I asked him directly one afternoon when we happened to be in the kitchen at the same time. He gave me a vague answer about the landlord, about timing, about needing to save up a little more. He was pleasant about it. He smiled. He said he really appreciated my hospitality and that he'd be out of my hair soon. That was week 11. I decided to do something I had never done in my first marriage. I opened a new checking account at a different bank. I didn't close the joint account. I wasn't trying to create a crisis. I was trying to create clarity. I redirected my consulting deposit to the new account. I left money in the joint account for household expenses, utilities, groceries, the mortgage payment, enough to cover what I had agreed to cover as part of our shared finances. But my personal income no longer flowed through a card that my wife handed to her brother on Tuesday afternoons for restaurant dinners. I didn't tell her right away. I wanted to make sure everything was properly set up first. I spent about a week getting it organized, transferred the direct deposit, set up bill pay for my personal expenses, left a clear and fair amount in the joint account. I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't trying to cut her off. I was just making a sensible adjustment based on what I had observed. The following Saturday morning, my wife went to the pharmacy to pick up her prescription. She used the joint debit card. It went through. There was still money in the joint account. But I imagine what happened next is that she tried to make a separate transaction, or perhaps she handed the card to Derek. I was never entirely sure which, and that transaction didn't go through the way she expected. The account was lower than she'd become accustomed to. Her buffer, the money she'd apparently been treating as available for Derek's expenses, had quietly disappeared. I was in the backyard on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and reading, when my phone rang. It was her. She had driven Derek to the grocery store. He had tried to pay for things with the card she had given him. It was declined. She wasn't screaming exactly, but her voice was tight and high in a way I hadn't heard before. She said there must be an error. She said the bank had made a mistake. She asked me what was going on. I told her to come home and we would talk. They both walked in about 15 minutes later. Derek stood slightly behind my wife, arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. I was sitting at the kitchen table. I had made a fresh pot of coffee. I offered them both a cup. Neither of them took me up on it. My wife sat down across from me. Derek stayed standing near the counter. I explained quietly and clearly what I had done. I told her I had opened a separate personal account. I told her that my income was now deposited there. I told her the joint account remained open and funded for our shared household expenses, the same amount every month, which I had calculated fairly based on our bills. I told her that this meant there was no longer surplus money in the joint account available for unplanned expenses. She stared at me. Derek said quietly, "I didn't ask for any of this." I looked at him. I said, "I know you didn't ask, but it happened anyway, and nobody asked me either." There was a long silence. My wife said this felt like a betrayal. I thought about that word carefully before I responded. I said I understood why she might feel that way. But I told her that I had raised my concerns directly and specifically, that I had told her what was happening with the money, that I had given her the opportunity to address it with me, and that instead I had been told I didn't understand what family meant. I said that I had no choice but to protect our finances in the way I knew how. She said she couldn't believe I had done this without telling her. I said I had told her. I had told her 6 weeks ago at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, with dates and receipts and specific amounts. The thing I hadn't told her was my solution. But I had been very clear about the problem. Derek left the room at some point during this. I heard the guest room door close. My wife and I talked for almost 2 hours that morning. Not an argument exactly. More like a negotiation that neither of us had planned to have. She said she felt caught between us. I told her I hadn't put her there. The situation had put her there, and she'd been avoiding dealing with it. She said Derek had nowhere to go. I said Derek was 29 years old with, as far as I could tell, no particular disability preventing him from working, and that it was time for him to figure out an adult solution. She brought up his difficult past again. I said I was sorry he'd had a hard time. I meant it. Life is hard for a lot of people. But I also said that I was 63 years old, and I had spent my career building financial stability, and I was not going to spend my retirement years subsidizing a grown man who had never once said thank you. She got quiet when I said that. I think it landed because it was true. In 3 months of living in my house, eating food purchased with my money, driving somewhere on my gas, Derek had never once looked me in the eye and said, "I appreciate this." He'd been pleasant in a surface-level way, the way someone is pleasant when they don't feel particularly obligated to you. She asked me what I wanted to happen. I told her I wanted two things. First, a firm and real move-out date for Derek. A specific date, written down, agreed to by all three of us. Second, I wanted us to have a clear conversation about household finances going forward. What was shared, what was separate, what required mutual agreement before money was spent. I told her I wasn't asking her to stop caring about her brother. I was asking her to be my partner first. She sat with that for a while. Then she asked if Derek needed help. Was there any world where we could help him together in a way that was agreed upon, that came from both of us? I said yes. That is exactly what I had always wanted, for it to be a decision we made together, with an amount we discussed, for a purpose we both understood, not her handing our shared card to him in a grocery store parking lot. She nodded slowly. The move-out date we agreed on was 6 weeks from that conversation. We wrote it on a piece of paper, and all three of us signed it. My wife's idea, actually, and I thought it was a good one. Derek was civil about it. Not warm, but civil. I think he understood that the arrangement had run its course. In those 6 weeks, I watched something shift in my wife. She stopped trying to broker things between us. She started asking me before committing to anything financial. Small things at first. She asked if it was okay to buy a new set of dish towels from the joint account. I almost laughed. I said, of course. She said she just wanted to ask. I told her that was all I had ever wanted. Derek moved out on the agreed date. He had found a room in a shared house about 12 minutes away, which told me the apartment not ready situation had always been more flexible than we'd been led to believe. He brought his gaming chair and his 3 monitors and his boxes, and he left. He shook my hand at the door. I shook it back. My wife stood on the porch and watched him load the truck. She looked a little sad, and I didn't try to minimize that. Loving your sibling is real. Missing them when they leave is real. I put my hand on her shoulder and she leaned into it slightly. That was 6 months ago. We've had some hard conversations since then. Real ones. About money and expectations and what we each assumed going into this marriage that we never actually said out loud. She told me she grew up in a household where you never turned family away, no matter what, no matter the cost. I told her I grew up in a household where you kept your word and you paid your way, and you didn't let pride stop you from doing your share. Neither of us was wrong exactly. We were just operating from different sets of rules that we'd never bothered to compare. We have a budget now, a real one, written down. We have a joint account for household expenses, and we each have our own accounts for personal spending. Every month we sit down and look at it together. She told me recently that she'd never done that with anyone before, that in her first marriage the finances were handled entirely by her husband, and she never really knew what was in the accounts. She said it felt strange at first, sitting down with the numbers, but that now she liked it. She felt less anxious about money than she had in years. I told her that was the point. That was always the point. Last week, Derek called her while I was sitting nearby. I could hear her side of it. He was having some trouble with the landlord at the new place. I watched her face carefully, not with suspicion, just paying attention. She listened for a while. Then she said, "I love you, but you need to figure this one out yourself." And she said she had to go, and she hung up. She looked at me, and I looked at her. She said, "Don't make a big deal of it." I said, "I'm not making anything." She smiled, just slightly. So did I. I'm not telling you this story because everything is perfect now. Marriages at our age are complicated. We carry so much history into them. Patterns from our first marriages, habits from decades of living alone, beliefs about money and loyalty that got baked into us before we even knew we were being shaped. Undoing all of that takes time. It takes a lot of patience and a willingness to stay in the room even when the conversation is uncomfortable. But I am telling you that I do not regret protecting what I worked for. I do not regret sitting down at that kitchen table and speaking clearly about what I had seen and what I needed. I don't regret opening that account. A younger version of me might have stayed quiet to avoid conflict, might have kept absorbing the cost because it felt easier than the confrontation. But I'm 63. I have watched too many men of my generation give away their peace to keep someone else comfortable. Enabling is not the same thing as loving. I learned that late. I wish I'd learned it sooner. If you monitor your accounts, really monitor them. Not just a glance at the balance, but a real line-by-line read every week. You catch things early. You catch them when they're still small. You can have a reasonable conversation at that stage. If you wait until the damage is large, the conversation gets much harder, and the relationship gets much more fragile. My father taught me that. Not about marriage specifically, but about money, about paying attention, about not looking away from things just because looking at them is uncomfortable. I look at things directly now. I have for years. It has cost me some comfort in the short run and saved me a great deal of grief in the long one. That's all I've got. Take from it what you need.